Okay, so today we're going deep into all things Desmond Tutu.
A deep dive.
Yeah, a deep dive into this incredible life, fighting against apartheid
Right.
and synonymous with that whole movement. But
Yeah.
obviously, I think most people listening probably know him for the Nobel Peace Prize. But we've got a lot more to get into today, right?
We do.
Like way more than just...
Yeah, you've given me a lot of great stuff.
Oh, but good.
It's like a mix of biographical information, but then also these really interesting articles that talk about his leadership.
Yeah.
And then even a piece from the U.S. Institute of Peace.
Wow.
About his peace-building strategies, which I thought was fascinating.
I mean, it seems like there's a lot more to uncover here.
Yeah, I think so.
Definitely. It's not just a simple, here's the guy who won the Nobel Peace Prize. End of story.
No.
There's a lot more to it.
There are controversies, there are nuances to his life that I think are really interesting to unpack.
Yeah, and I think what I'm interested in is, how intertwined his faith and his activism were,
Oh, absolutely.
That's something I really want to kind of get into.
Yeah, because it wasn't just like a backdrop. It was really fueling his actions and shaping his approach to some of these global conflicts.
And I think to understand that, we have to go back to the beginning, right? So, born in 1931 in South Africa.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, to a poor family, a family with mixed heritage.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, he actually trained as a teacher.
Oh, wow.
Before turning to the Anglican priesthood.
So education was, a pretty big theme, it seems like, early on.
Huge theme. Yeah, absolutely. And he and his wife, Leah, actually left teaching in protest against the Bantu Education Act in 1953.
Oh, wow. So what was it about that act that made them, take such a strong stand?
It was designed to segregate education.
Oh, wow.
And to limit the opportunities available to Black South Africans.
Okay.
And Tutu saw this as a way to further entrench inequality, and he refused to be a part of it. So that's why he and his wife left teaching.
That's a powerful statement for sure.
Yeah.
And so then he kind of chooses this path of theology, right? And goes on to study in London, which I imagine was a pretty big contrast to, what he was experiencing in South Africa at the time.
It's hard to even imagine, right?
Yeah.
Experiencing freedom from apartheid's restrictions for the first time.
Right.
And this is a period that scholars say really had a profound impact on him.
Yeah.
In shaping his views on social justice and the power of peaceful resistance.
Okay, so he comes back to South Africa.
Yeah.
And starts teaching at the Federal Theological Seminary.
He does.
And I think this is also around the time when he witnesses police brutality.
That's right.
Against student protesters.
So this is really a pivotal moment, I think, in his life because it solidified his commitment to fighting injustice. Mm-hmm. But it's really important to note that he chose to do it through nonviolent means.
Do you think his theological training in London played a role in that commitment to nonviolence?
I think it's highly likely, right? I mean, his exposure to all these different theological ideas, the emphasis on social justice within certain branches of the Anglican Church, it all probably contributed to this.
So it's interesting how these early experiences seem to really lay the groundwork for his activism later on.
Totally.
And then not too long after that, he takes on this even more prominent role, becoming the General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches.
Yeah, 1978.
1978.
He becomes the first Black leader of that organization.
Wow.
And it gave him a platform to speak out against apartheid, which he did.
Oh, he did. I mean,
yeah.
He was never afraid to speak truth to power, even when it meant, facing real danger. His passport was confiscated not once, but twice.
Yeah, that's right.
That's intense.
It is, but it actually amplified his voice internationally.
Right.
And really brought attention to the atrocities of apartheid.
And then, 1984, he wins the Nobel Peace Prize. Right. Such a testament to his commitment to nonviolent resistance, What do you think that moment meant for the anti-apartheid movement?
It was huge.
Yeah.
I mean, it really was a validation of the struggle against apartheid on a global stage.
Right.
And it put immense pressure on the South African government.
Oh, for sure.
And it forced the world to pay attention.
Yeah.
I think more than they had been before.
It's like they couldn't ignore it anymore.
Right. Exactly.
And then, so his journey continues within the church as well, and he becomes the first Black Archbishop of Cape Town.
In 1986.
In 1986. And this wasn't just symbolic,
right?
Right?
It was a real
it was a real shift.
Demonstration of the changing landscape in South Africa.
Yeah.
And the growing power of the movement for equality.
So he's at the forefront of this. He's calling for sanctions against South Africa. But then at the same time, he's working, like, behind the scenes, mediating between these rival Black factions.
It's like talk about leadership.
It's so complex.
It's so complex.
Because he's pushing for change, but he's also advocating for peace at the same time.
Yeah.
During a very volatile time. It's
Yeah.
a very delicate balancing act that I don't think a lot of people could pull off.
Right.
Yeah.
And this kind of leads us into, I think, what a lot of people consider one of the most impactful chapters.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Which is his role in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the TRC. We're going to get into that
In the next part
in the next part
of our deep dive.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we left off talking about, all this intense activism, right?
Yeah.
It's the mid-90s
Yeah.
in South Africa. And, I mean, finally, right? The fight against apartheid is over.
Yeah.
Nelson Mandela's president. But things are still,
Fragile.
fragile, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not like everything's fixed.
No, there's still a lot of healing that needs to happen.
Right.
And that's really where the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the TRC, comes in.
So it's 1996. Mandela appoints Tutu to chair this commission, which talk about a task.
Huge, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just investigating apartheid.
Yeah.
It's also...
Like, how do you even begin to...
Right. To heal from something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I think this is where his philosophy, like that concept of Ubuntu, really comes into play, right?
It's huge.
Like this idea that we're all interconnected, like the shared humanity.
It's not just some like fluffy concept. It's like a way of life.
Yeah.
It's recognizing that our well-being is tied to everyone else's well-being.
Okay.
So for Tutu, this meant that true justice couldn't just be about punishment.
Right.
It had to involve acknowledging the humanity of even those who had done really terrible things.
So how did that actually, like, play out in the work of the TRC?
Well, I mean, you've got...
We're talking victims confronting their abuser.
Yeah, like, imagine these public hearings.
Right.
These raw emotional testimonies. Victims sharing their stories. Perpetrators confessing their crimes.
Oh, wow.
In detail, publicly.
Oh.
Like, this was designed to break the silence, to bring the truth out into the open.
Yeah.
And hopefully to start the process of healing.
I mean, Tutu himself, like, he was so...
Oh, he was deeply affected by it.
Yeah,
Like, one of the sources talks about how he would often weep openly during these testimonies.
Oh,
like, sharing the pain of the victims.
Oh, man.
But he also really believed that forgiveness, while incredibly difficult, was essential for South Africa's future.
So, obviously the TRC wasn't without its critics, right?
Of course not.
Like, some people felt like offering amnesty was basically letting people off the hook.
Right. And that was a huge debate at the time.
Yeah.
And Tutu, acknowledged that it wasn't perfect.
Yeah.
It had its limitations. But he argued that this focus on truth-telling and forgiveness offered a better chance for peace than just punishment.
Right.
He thought that acknowledging the past was a necessary step towards building a more just future.
And we have to remember, right, like South Africa was...
Oh, so fragile at that time.
All right.
Emerging from all this conflict.
It was a gamble, the whole TRC thing. It's like, let's try this other way and see what happens.
So it did have a huge impact, though, right?
It did.
I mean, helped expose the realities of apartheid, gave a voice to the victims.
Yeah, I mean, and facilitated reconciliation.
Yeah.
Like, whether it achieved justice or not is up for debate, but its influence is undeniable.
So dismantling apartheid? I mean, monumental achievement.
Right.
You'd think maybe he'd take a break.
Yeah.
Right? Like, relax a little bit.
No, not a chance.
But no.
No, this guy just keeps going.
This is where his global voice comes in.
Exactly.
He becomes this global figure speaking out on all these issues.
And this is where the humor comes in.
Oh, yeah, that mischievous sense of humor.
Like, one minute he's delivering this, like, scathing critique.
Right.
And the next minute he's cracking a joke.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It was part of his charm, but it was also a tool.
Oh.
It disarmed his opponents. It helped him connect with people on a human level.
Okay.
And even in dark times, it reminded everyone that hope and joy were still possible.
So, like, what were some of the global issues he was tackling? Like, he was a vocal critic of the Iraq War.
Oh, huge critic of the Iraq War.
Okay.
He called it an immoral war.
Wow.
Compared the coalition forces to the apartheid regime.
Oh, man.
So, that obviously didn't go over well with everyone.
I can imagine.
Especially in the West.
Yeah.
And he was also a huge advocate for Palestinian rights.
Okay.
Criticizing Israel's policies. And, that led to accusations of anti-Semitism.
Which he denied.
Which he vehemently denied.
Yeah.
So he wasn't afraid to ruffle some feathers, even if it meant alienating some of his allies.
And he did that with, like, the ANC, too.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
The party he supported for so long.
Like, publicly criticized them.
Yeah.
For corruption.
Yeah, he publicly criticized President Zuma.
Yeah.
For corruption.
Which is pretty amazing, like, the commitment.
It takes courage to do that.
Yeah.
To stand up to the people you've supported, the people who are supposedly on your side.
Right.
And say, no, this is wrong.
Yeah, that the fight doesn't end.
Right, exactly.
Just because, like, this one regime is dismantled.
Yeah, it's ongoing, constant vigilance.
And through all of this, like, even with all these setbacks, personal attacks, he never seemed to lose faith in humanity.
That's what's so remarkable. I mean, it would have been so easy to become cynical, but he never did.
Yeah.
He held on to this belief that a better world was possible.
Yeah, which I think is something we can all learn from.
Absolutely, because it's so easy to get caught up in the negativity of the world.
Yeah.
But Tutu reminds us that change is possible.
Yeah.
That even small acts of kindness and courage can make a difference.
So I guess as we go into the final part of this deep dive, the question becomes, what does his legacy actually mean for us today?
Right.
Like, how can we actually apply these lessons to our own lives? He wasn't just fighting against something.
Right.
He was fighting for something, Like, this better world that he truly believed in.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
Even when surrounded by so much darkness.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and never losing that joy.
Right.
And that, like, mischievous humor.
Like one article I read called him the laughing prophet.
Oh, wow. That's a good one.
It's great, right?
It's like you can be serious about justice.
Totally.
But also, like, have fun and laugh along the way.
She showed us that you can be deeply principled, but also playful.
Yeah.
And that joy and laughter are tools for change.
Yeah. So, as we kind of wrap up here, like, what does this all mean for us?
Right.
Like, what do we do with this?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and compassionate world. Like, Tutu wasn't a superhero.
Right.
He was just an ordinary guy who decided to make a stand.
Yeah, yeah.
So he reminds us that change doesn't just happen on its own.
Right.
It takes constant effort, courage, a willingness to challenge the way things are.
Yeah.
Even when it's uncomfortable.
Even when it's really hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's like he showed us we don't have to choose between, like, fighting for justice and living a joyful life.
Right.
Like, they can go together.
They're interconnected.
Yeah.
You can do both.
So it could be, like, speaking out.
Yeah.
Volunteering. Just treating everyone with kindness.
Like those small acts.
Yeah.
Multiplied by millions of people, create a ripple effect.
Yeah, okay.
That's the power of Ubuntu in action,
So maybe that's what we leave our listeners with. Okay, what's one small thing you can do today, inspired by Tutu's life, to make the world a little better?
I love it.
Even if it seems insignificant, like, it matters.
It all adds up.
Yeah.
It all makes a difference.
It all makes a difference. So
yeah.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's been quite a journey.
It has. I've learned a lot.
Yeah, me too. Me too.